Welcome. I'm Brendon Christian, Director at Christian the Law Firm, and in this clip we're focusing on web development agreements. By way of an introductory comment, please note that the observations I make here apply equally to small-scale projects like the development and design of a website or an app, through to much larger scale IT projects that indeed and in fact would take place over the course of anything from 18 to 24 months. The first observation I wish to make concerns identifying exactly who the parties to the contract are. Now, this might seem an obvious point, but indeed and in fact in practice this is where much of the difficulty stems from. And by this I have in mind those instructions I received via our dispute resolution department within the firm, where effectively what you see is the startup, let's call him party A, concluded a contract with party B, thinking that party B would be the actual developer. Lo and behold, it transpired that party B was simply a middleman who then outsourced the entire work, the implementation of the project that is, through to a company out in India or Eastern Europe without party A's consent. So the lesson to be learned here is it makes the most sense to be unequivocally clear as to who exactly, in terms of identity, is responsible for what in terms of the project. And indeed and in fact, if there is to be any subcontracting or outsourcing, that needs to be made equivocally clear within the contract. The second observation I wish to make is the need for a detailed project scope. And certainly within our templates within the firm, we have this annexed as Annex A to the web development agreement. Now, in terms of the project scope, you want to be clear on a number of key aspects concerning the project, such as the start date and, most importantly, the completion date. Equally importantly, you want to be clear as to what are the key deliverables within the course of the project and when, by way of a timeline or indeed dates, those deliverables or those milestones will be delivered upon. The third observation I wish to make concerns the need for an implementation plan, or some might call it a project plan. This is my Annex B to our web development agreements within the firm. And yeah, we have in mind detailing specifically who is responsible for implementing what during the course of the project. It also makes perfect sense within this particular annex to deal with, for example, changes during the course of the project. If there are any changes to be made, what is the change procedure? How are changes to be handled? And so forth. The fourth observation I wish to make concerns design specification. This, in my mind, is Annex C to the web development agreement. And it's an extremely technical document in terms of which the parties need to agree expressly all manner of specifications, ranging from the browser, the app, or the website's going to be tested in, through to the code and the language that's going to be used, the software, and so forth. The fifth observation I wish to make concerns the need for the parties to agree a price and a payment plan. To be fair, the web developer cannot be expected to wait until completion to be paid, particularly in circumstances where the project may take several months. The flip side of that same coin is that the client, the startup, might recognize that this is one instance where she can, to a large extent, control the project, particularly ensuring that she does not upfront pay significant amount of monies for a website or an app that she will never receive. So this is a nice point within the agreement to balance the parties' respective rights and obligations. And so, yeah, we take this as an opportunity to perhaps fix the payment of different installments of the entire agreed price to key deliverables within the life of the project. So, the price and payment plan being detailed within Annex D to the web agreement. And the critical point to remember there is price and payment plan, particularly payment plan, being fixed to key deliverables, key project deliverables across the entire project plan. This then brings us on to observation 6, warranties. The parties need to talk about and agree warranties and a warranty period. And by warranties, we're talking here that the project will be free of viruses, bugs, defects, errors, that it would conform to specification, that it would not infringe third-party intellectual property rights, and so on. The 7th observation I wish to make concerns indemnities for loss or damages suffered from a resultant breach of the contract. The 8th observation I wish to make concerns subcontracting. Deal with this openly, honestly, thoroughly within Annex E to the Web Development Agreement. The 9th observation I wish to make concerns hosting. Doesn't present much difficulties in practice, but it's an important aspect of the contract. And the web developer here particularly will be concerned to avoid any liability, particularly where the host provider is a third party outside of the web developer's business. The 10th observation I wish to make concerns particularly where the website is going to be transactional in nature, i.e. where there's going to be a shopping cart, for example. Now this brings in a raft of different types of legal issues, particularly in the EU, for example, where the e-commerce regulations and the distance selling regulations will apply. It's important that you take professional legal advice, i.e. come and speak to us concerning this. While we're on the subject of technical complex points of EU law, just bear in mind while we're here, potentially data protection issues that this type of contract will raise, and think clearly around, for example, in the EU again, cookie law, for example, and in the UK specifically, the Data Protection Act, for example. The 11th observation I wish to make concerns hardware. Is hardware going to be provided? If so, this needs to be dealt with within the Web Development Agreement. The 12th observation I wish to make concerns software. Are we going to bring in third-party software? If so, who's responsible for obtaining the appropriate licenses and consents? And in terms of liability, who does liability fall upon? The 13th observation I wish to make concerns progress meetings. This, in my mind, is absolutely fundamental. There needs to be regular progress meetings across the entire life of the project between the parties at regular intervals. And certainly to my mind, this should be detailed within Annex F to the agreement. The 14th observation I wish to make concerns intellectual property rights. Be unequivocally clear within the agreement. Who owns the IP rights on completion of the project, perhaps even during the course of the project? The 15th observation I wish to make concerns maintenance and support post-completion. What are the sort of minimum service levels we're talking about? And indeed and in fact, is that the subject of a separate maintenance contract? Think about that. The 15th observation I wish to make concerns acceptance tests and installation tests. The client might be particularly concerned on or around completion or immediately before that there be certain tests done and that the testing needs to be successful before the parties can say that the project has been successfully concluded. Now, what results would be deemed a success and what results would be deemed conclusive? These are some of the things we need to think around here in the course of installation and acceptance tests. We also need to think about what happens if there's a failure on the test. Does the client have a right to reject the contract, or indeed and in fact, is acceptance of the project linked to payment? The parties might also be particularly concerned around confidentiality. The client might have concerns around confidentiality of the project per se, or the relationship between the parties should be a matter that is subject to confidentiality. And so any marketing materials, for example, needs to be run by the client, or indeed the developer for that matter, prior to going out. Think also around cancellation and breach. What would constitute breach that would entitle either party to cancel? Dispute resolution, absolutely fundamental. Agree a process to resolve any disputes between the parties. Also, particularly in the large-scale IT contracts, where, for example, the parties might be in different parts of the world, think around the governing law that's applicable to the agreement and the jurisdiction of the courts to which any disputes might be referred, if indeed we're going down that route. Like I said earlier, think around ongoing maintenance and support and whether that's the subject of a separate maintenance contract. If it is to be provided in terms of this agreement, how is it going to be provided? How is it going to be charged? What are realistic timeframes within which the contractor is to respond? What are realistic timeframes within which the problem is to be fixed? Further observation relates to the client per se. I think, to be fair to the contractor, to be fair to the developer, I think the contract needs to state quite clearly what exactly is required of the client. Content. Content is a classic example. What are the appropriate permissions, consents, and licenses that the client is responsible for obtaining, particularly around IP rights, logos, branding, content, etc. The client might have training needs and training requirements for its staff. Deal with that in the contract. What happens if the client is late in delivering content? Oh, and equally importantly, always think, and again this is a lawyer speaking, always think quite clearly around the legal relationship between the parties. The developer might quite rightly be of the view that, hang on a second, I am an independent contractor. This project is by no means a joint venture, nor does it represent a partnership between us. And for that matter, I am certainly not the client's employee. I am, for all intents and purposes, says the web developer, an independent contractor. So think around that as well. I hope you found this rather useful. Apologies for the length it took, but there were some important issues which we needed to deal with here. I am Brendon Christian, director at Christian the law firm, and please, absolutely, this is an incredibly important aspect of the law, and so do take professional legal advice, i.e. come and speak to me at the firm or one of the team at Christian the law firm. It's Brendon Christian, director at Christian the law firm. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us.